How's it going, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about input and output in Python. So what exactly is input and output? Well, in our last video we actually saw that we actually printed out hello world, right, to the terminal. We said print hello world, and then when we run this program, right, it's going to print it out in the terminal, right? So this is an example of output, right, because it's printing it out. Well, what you might ask, what if I actually wanted the user to actually type something in here and then actually want to do something with that value? Well, that's an example of input. And how this is done in Python is pretty simple, right? You would say input, this is a function that's built in, you would say input, open parentheses, and then you would type in the prompt. So let's say I want to say, hey, oops, hey, what is, okay, I can't type again. What is your name, right? And then I want to add a space, because when you add a space, you don't have to do it manually. So I'll show you what that means, right? So when you run this, so as you can see here, there's a space. If I didn't actually add the space, then it would have been like my prompt would have started here. I could have still added a space. It just would have had to been manually, right? So this is just an aesthetic thing, right? So if I run this, yeah, see, I can still add a space, right? But it's just, so I'm gonna say my name is Shihab, gonna press enter. So now that's done, right? So I'm not actually doing anything with that value just because I haven't actually said or actually coded anything to do with that value. So it's important to understand that input basically is gonna read whatever the user typed in, right? And that's always gonna be stored as a string. So as you can see here, it reads a string from standard input. So it's very important to know that this is actually a string, and because it makes more sense, right? Because the user can actually type whatever they want. They can type a number. Oops. Oh my. Okay, they can type a number. They can type whatever they want. So this cannot be stored as like an int, right? If they type whatever they want, it should be stored as a string. And then later on, if you want to do some conversion and you actually want to convert it to a string, you can. And we're going to be talking about that in a second. So let's fix this first. So now what if I actually wanted to store this value that the user put in and I actually want to do something with it? How do you do that? Well, refer back to our last video. Remember, we said that we can actually create variables. So I want to actually assign this to a variable. So I'm going to say, I want to call my variable name, and I want to assign this value that the user puts in, and I'm going to actually assign it to a variable called name. And then I'm actually going to print it just to make sure that it works, right? So when you run this, what happens is, right, we get, hey, what is your name? I type my name in, and then it actually prints out my name, because that's what I said. I said, hey, you know what? I actually want to access this variable that I defined, and it's actually assigned a value that the user put in, and then I want to print it. Well, you might say, well, this is kind of useless. You're asking for their name, and then you're just printing out their name. That's kind of useless. What's the point of this, right? So we want to have a more meaningful response to, let's say, a user who's inputting their name, like, hey, your name. How are you doing, right? So how would you do this? If we want to actually say, hey, hey, right, how would we actually add kind of these two together? So this is called string concatenation. So basically you're adding two strings together to form like one string, right? You're concatenating strings together. So how to do this is you can actually add a plus. So what this does is says, okay, I'm gonna actually get this string and I'm gonna add it as it is to this other string, right? So the thing about this though is that it can actually get pretty you have to manually add spaces, you have to manually add the plus, right? So as you can see here, it worked totally fine. I can even add, you know, something else, like I can add another plus and say, and like a comma, and then add, how are you doing, for instance, right? And then I can prompt the user again here, right? But just for simplicity's sake, we'll keep it. Hey, what is your name? Oops, spelled it wrong. So an easier way to actually format your strings to actually call your variables, and you don't have to actually manually add pluses or spaces, is a new, this is the newest version that Python actually came up with, and it's actually called a formatted string. So let's do the same thing, print, and then here we have to pass in a value, right? So how you can actually do this is you actually first type F, right? And then you put single quotation marks. And then inside, you type the string that you want. So I want to say, hey, the same thing. I want to type the same exact thing. But now I don't actually have to add a plus here and then call the name. Inside, I can actually call the variable. And how I do that is I actually open curly braces. And then inside, I would call the name of the variable. So my variable is actually called name. So I'm going to actually call it here. So I'm going to actually keep the same thing going and say, how are you doing? right? As you can see here, it's actually the same exact thing. They both do the same exact thing, but as you can see, this is way cleaner. Because let's say you actually had a whole paragraph of text and you had multiple variables like name, age, address, everything. You'd have to keep adding plus, formatting it, adding spaces. This just simplifies it all. You can just simply call it as it is inside curly braces. Alright guys, well you might ask, okay, that's cool, but what about like, what if I wanted to actually do some calculations and not just repeat the value? Well, let's take an example. Let's say we ask the user for their age. So, hey, how old are you? Right? And then again, we save the variable, we save the value of whatever the user typed in to a variable called age, right? And then we can print out the age saying, and again, we want to use a format string just because it's way simpler and cleaner. So I want to say you are, right? Open curly braces, age, right? So now when you run this, what's going to happen is, how old are you? I'm going to say 20, and then it's going to say you are 20. All right, thanks. I already knew that. I inputted that value. So let's say I want to do some, more useful calculation, and I actually want to say, you know what? I'm actually going to subtract. Let's say that the person who's actually getting this value is 40 years old. So I want to actually, or let's say 50, right? So I'm going to say my age is 50, right? So I'm assigning an int to a variable called my age, and then now ideally I want to actually get their value here, to their age value, and I actually want to use that variable and subtract the difference. I'm going to say age difference, right? And now I want to say 50, or no, I actually want to access the variable directly here, which is my age, and I want to actually subtract their age from my age. I want to say my age, subtract their age. So what this is doing is saying, okay, I'm going to get their age. I'm going to say you're 20 years old, which is completely useless, and I'm going to actually subtract their age from my age. And then I actually want to say our age difference is age difference years, right? So what this is going to do, first of all, we're going to get the age. So how old are you? We're going to get the age of the user, and then we're going to print out that age using a formatted string, right? And then I'm actually going to have my age here, which is actually 50, for instance. Let's say the user the guy who's actually getting the value from the user is actually 50 years old, and he says, okay, I actually want to get the age difference. So I'm going to say my age, so 50 years old, subtracting the user's age that they put in. So in this case would be 20. So 50 minus 20 should be 30. And then I'm going to print out the age difference saying, hey, okay, our age difference is, I'm going to actually access this variable, and I'm going to say our age is this many years, right? So let's try this. Let's see if this works. How old are you? Uh-oh, what is this? There's an error. Well, why is that? Well, because remember what I said here. I said that the input is always a string, right? And you cannot do some arithmetic or math on a string. This is actually a string value. You're basically saying, hey, you know what? I actually want to do 50 minus, this is essentially what you're doing. You're saying 50, oops, what did I just do? Oh, so I said 50 minus 20. This doesn't make sense. This is not a number. This is a string. This does not make sense. So right away, you're saying that there's a type error, right? Because you cannot do arithmetic on an integer and a string. So how do we actually fix this issue? Well, it's pretty simple. We just have to convert this value, right? This input, this string value, my age, into an integer, so we can easily do math on it, right? So how do you do that? Well, there's actually a function called input. Sorry, I already know there's a function called input. There's a function called int. So what int does is basically it gets an argument here, which in this case is going to be a string. So I'm going to put in age, right? And what it's going to do is it's actually going to say, okay, I have a string argument. I'm actually putting a string in here, and I actually want to convert this string to an integer, just like this one, so I can actually do some calculations on it, right? So let's actually reassign the value of this variable age to an integer. So now I'm saying, okay, first of all, I'm going to get your age, right? But naturally, this is actually formatted as a string data type. I'm actually going to print this out as a string. That's totally fine. And then I'm actually going to convert your age that's actually in a string data type to a integer by using this function that's built in. Then I'm actually going to compare our ages, subtract your age from mine, and print out the age difference. So this should actually work because I actually converted to an integer, and now I can actually do math on it, right? So as you can see here, it works. First we get the age as a string, we convert it to an integer, and then we subtract this user age from my age in this case, which is 50 for example, and then I actually print out the age difference, right? So now you guys know how input and output works on a basic level, and you can actually, play around with this, make some cool input and output. You can actually keep it going. You can say, you can put another input and say like, tell me about yourself, right? Some stuff like that, and then the user can actually type in whatever they want. So you can actually play around this, and when you first start programming, this stuff is pretty cool. You can actually like, say I am a student. Oh, okay, this shouldn't be caps, whatever. But you can just make a simple console application where you're, have a lot of input and output. So it's pretty cool to play around with. And now you guys actually know how you can actually convert input to integers, right? And actually do some calculations on those inputs. So thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned.